Sounds good.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. I'm your host. I'm Mary Ann Dersh. As you know, I work with nonprofit leaders to master the art of influence so they can ask for and receive all they want, need, and deserve. And today we are talking leadership and sustainable change and all the cool things that we want to do as nonprofit leaders with my new friend, Patrick Farran, right? I got it
That's
right.
correct. You
Okay,
did.
now the second is you're at the Ad Lucem Group, right?
That's correct.
Yes? Okay. And I'll give you the quick bio and then we're going to get started. You're founder of this group, you're former consulting director. I don't know what SAS Institute is. What is that?
It's a large software company. Did a lot of public
Gotcha.
sector consulting work in that
Okay,
context.
Notre Dame MBA. Wow, you've done it. Okay. Uh, Fortune guiding Fortune 100 startups and nonprofits through change management, culture transformation, and engagement, because that is what we really want to do as nonprofit leaders is create sustainable change. Why else would we be here if we couldn't?
Right.
Right. Patrick, I want to get into that, but I always start with this, and I always start with this question, which is tell me something you're proud of that you don't get to brag about a lot. So
So,
what is something that like maybe unusual or interesting or different about you that you don't get to brag about a lot?
I don't know if this is necessarily unusual, but for me, I consider coaching a calling. I think, it's probably rooted in the fact that I was an early educator in my career. I still teach at the collegiate and higher education level here. But for me, I get such intrinsic joy from seeing the ripple effect that maybe something in one of our coaching conversations has on that person's life, on their families, on the organizations they serve, and that's what fuels me. So, I could tell specific stories, but that for me is what it's all about and what gets me up each morning.
Yeah, I love that because I feel the exact same way. And I would, I was coaching people without really seeing myself as a coach or that like that would be a business model. And I just remember I had lunch. This one was like, hey, can meet me for lunch? We were colleagues, right? And I really need some guidance. And I said, yeah, sure. Like that one lunch, and she would like within months, she had like changed jobs. It was da, da, da. I just gave her a little bit of feedback in a way that was really felt good for her. And I don't know, sometimes the universe just has to slap you on the forehead and tell you to. I
Indeed,
was just doing
indeed.
it so much, and
Yeah,
honestly, and I the same way, it gives me so much joy just to see somebody rise and bring everybody with them,
indeed.
right? Because it's never about the individual. For me, it's always the impact on the collective, right? When you raise your game, then other people around you are going to raise their game. And that's
That's
kind of
exactly
what we're
right.
talking about today. So I would love for you to start this conversation with where you see the gaps in leadership, um, in being able to create sustainable change, and especially right now. I mean, there's always going to be difficult, turbulent times.
Right.
I mean, so we can't wait for things to calm down because this is not a thing that happens. So what do you see are the challenges or the struggles or kind of the gaps in what people are trying to do and that aren't really able to accomplish?
That's a big existential question, right? I think that one of the areas that commonly contributes to this unmooring, if you will, is if we lose sight of what is our why. What is our purpose for being? What is our purpose as a leader, as an organization, et cetera? And we often get tied up in the tactical and the business of the day or the crisis of the day, whatever that may be. And we neglect to stop and pause and see, is this aligned with what we're really trying to accomplish? Right. And so I think recentering on that purpose is one of the fundamental pieces that is really powerful in addressing this. And we can unpack that a little bit more, but that's sort of the first anchoring thought that I want to offer.
Yeah, I have a phrase that one of my coaches taught me. It's just like you focus on the why and the who, right? Like why are you doing it and who are you doing it for? And the what and the how will figure out.
Right.
And I
Right.
think we get, and from what I hear you saying, like reinterpreting it into my language is we get overly invested in the what and the how, which
Right.
and those are things that are going to change with crisis, right? Like, and so being flexible in the how, I think, is how we can respond to things like
Right.
that without wanting to control for each thing.
There's a really powerful quote. It was originated by Friedrich Nietzsche, popularized by Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning. And I'll paraphrase here, I may not get it exactly right, but it's basically if you have a big enough why, you can endure anyhow.
Yes.
Right. And Viktor Frankl studied, concentration camp survivors and so forth. And those who flourished were folks that were really centered on what they have to live for. What are they centered on? And it's amazing how powerful that construct is.
Yeah. I have a phrase that I use. It's like it's the medicine and the cure. So people will swallow any medicine if the right the cure is strong enough, right? In the sense of like when we talk about our organizations, we tend to be overly focused on the how
Yeah.
and the medicine because that as a leader of right of this business is where our mind is. And so when people say like, "Oh, what do you do?" They're really asking like, "What impact do you have?" And then but you're replying like, "Oh, we do this and this and this," and that's like medicine. But what's the cure? Like, what's the outcome? What's the vision? What are we really creating? And that's what people buy into as
Right.
well, right? Not just the person, but that's what I think donors and community they buy into. What are we creating together?
Correct.
And so
That's
you have a framework. I'd love to get into you said proven frameworks for leaders to drive impact. So what can we do to be more impactful leaders?
Yeah, and so I could pull out a few highlights. We're probably, as of this recording, about 2 months away from our book being published. We're working
Oh,
on the release for that, and so in that book, it's called the Intentional Executive. It's a purpose-driven playbook to transform your leadership, your team, and your results. And some of the central tenets that we talk about, we really, as I mentioned a moment ago, is aligning on purpose is a really fundamental start to that. Doing that both at an individual level and then collectively at a team and an organizational level. Some of the other aspects of the framework that we talk about, and you alluded to this a moment ago, is it's really powerful. We espouse the power of co-creation, right? To the extent that you can have, your team members, your board members, your community members, your volunteers, et cetera, help to co-create. Whether it's a vision, a new initiative, a strategic plan, whatever those elements are, to the extent that it's feasible, of course, giving opportunity for authentic voice into the process. We always say that people support what they help to create.
yes.
And so making sure you build that into your process. Some of the other tactical pitfalls that we encourage folks to avoid, especially those that may be in new situations, new roles, or maybe they have a new mandate or so forth, is not worrying so much about having all the right answers. Right. This comes back to
Yes.
if you can have the humility to say, I don't know, right? And you're really asking engaging questions, really undertaking active listening. Again, whether that's from your donors, whether that's from your team members, et cetera, there's power and there's wisdom in that system and in that proverbial room, if you will. And so if you can tap into that, I'm working with a nonprofit executive director right now who, a really fundamental insight that she had just this week. We were talking about this. She said, I want to make more. Her insight was I want to make more space for I'm trying to how she articulated exactly, but basically that when you're going through change, make space for that resistance, make space for the reactions, make space for that, expecting that there's going to be bad. If you expect that and make space for that to hold that, right, you're able to receive that more. And leaning into if there's a constructive conflict that comes up, leaning into that with an attitude of curiosity. Sometimes our natural, it's that fight or flight syndrome that will kick in if we're not careful. But if you can just sit there and be comfortable with the fact that, hey, I'm uncomfortable, maybe uncomfortable right now with whatever this is that we're dealing with. I can be okay with that. If you can model that for your team, there's a lot of power in that. And the reality is, for especially new executives who may have that, I have to have all the answers. Your team members will actually respect you more if you are able to say, that's a great question. I don't know. Let's figure it out. What
Okay.
ideas do you have? Right. So there's a few initial thoughts. We can unpack that more, but I'll,
Yeah,
I'll pause
okay,
there.
there's a lot. That's a
It's a
lot.
lot we
Okay.
can unpack, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah. I want to start from the last and go to the first because and Um, and I think this is one of the reasons I don't sort of do traditional consulting. And I think our industry as a whole is re-examining that model of, hey, like here's how we're sick, how much would you charge to heal us? And then, and here's all the ways. And it's very prescriptive and transactional. And it doesn't require um anybody to be different, right? Like to grow or to show up differently. And in and what you're saying is like when you allow people, you're just asking what you and I have are the questions and the
Hmm.
framework to help people create empowered choices for themselves instead
Right.
of you telling me what to do, right? And that is so much more powerful than, oh, here's right, like here's my recommendation. And sometimes people ask me for that. And I say, I ask like, so help me understand why this is important. Like they just don't want to make a mistake. They
Hmm.
want a prescription, to fix it. Um and that's an okay expectation. And also what is super powerful about what you said is just the listening. We are so consumed with saying the right thing or having the right answer as if it's a magic wand that's going to, when really what moves people is asking the questions, right?
Right.
And allowing them to because people will tell you what they want.
Right.
I say this all the time. If people will tell you if you listen, they will tell you exactly what they want and need. You don't
Right.
have to guess, you don't have to pitch them. They'll tell you if you just listen.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You said something else when if I draw upon your illness metaphor, right? One of the other
Hmm.
things that we work on with our organizations is we practice appreciative inquiry, which is for those that may not be aware, is basically a strengths-based methodology. And so we look at when has the organization been at its best, right? And so there's this whole concept if you use the illness metaphor, being not, here's illness and here's being not sick, and that gap between the reality is this whole realm of flourishing that lives above the line of just the absence of illness, right? And the same thing is true within organizational health and vitality and sustainability and flourishing, right? We don't want to just look at what are these problems or deficits that we need to fix, right? And that's often where we fall into that problem solving mindset. And there's a time and a place for that. But to the extent that we can say, hey, we had this really great, whether it's a donor event or this really great conversation or really, great, um, you know, uh, initiative that we got off the ground and landed well, for example, what can we learn from that? How can we build on it? How can we double down on that? Far too often we fall into, we got to fix X, we got to fix Y, we got to fix Z. And there's so much more vitality that comes out of those conversations as well as a byproduct, looking at all the things that are going well and how can we double down on those and really refine those.
I absolutely love the word flourishing. That is a beautiful, like, wow, like I don't use that word enough, but yeah. And it's the difference between, I had one of my coaches explain to me, it's the difference between going to the doctor and getting a cure versus being healed. Like in the process of healing, I'm a different person, right? I can take a prescription and get better and I don't have to change, right? But in the process of healing, or what you're talking about, of flourishing, like you're saying what is the best, when do we show up the best, right? What are the best parts of us, and like how can we build on that? And like in that, in that way of like I am creating, I'm showing up differently, right? I'm
Right.
showing up with more impact instead of, one of the biggest things I work on is working with people who say, well, if this person would just behave in this way, then I'd feel better, right? Right? If if our government would do this, then I'd feel better. If my board did this, and actually it's the opposite. It's like I feel better. I feel right. I raise my standard, and then people will rise to meet it.
Right.
But we're waiting for other people to help um um like we make our joy conditional on what other people do. And what I found that organizations, individuals and organizations that are in a place of flourishing, they set their own standard,
Right.
right? They I call it the queen, like the sovereign one. I decide, I say, right? I say who comes and goes. So people will come to me and they'll say, I don't have any autonomy over my time. Well, that's a story that they're telling themselves, that they don't have
Hmm.
any autonomy. They actually do have autonomy. They've just like kind of forgot they had it. They gave their power away
They've
to other people.
relinquished it, right?
Yeah, yes, they
Yeah.
abdicated their power. And then
Yeah.
they like realize, oh wait, hold on. I actually can do this. It may be a little uncomfortable at first, right? And I can do it.
Right.
Um, So
I'll offer that we live in a socially constructed world, right? The organizations that we live in, they're all social constructs. And so that suggests that the words we use matter. It suggests that the thoughts we have between our ears matter. Our culture is built one conversation at a time. And the reality is when we choose to focus on the negative things and fixate on it, there's plenty to focus on if we want to do that. The
sure,
geopolitical landscape, the internal
sure.
organizational challenges, there's that list is endless. And if that's where we choose to focus, that's going to completely suck our souls and sap the life out of us, right?
Yes.
Conversely, if we can really focus on, it doesn't mean ignore them, it doesn't mean be Pollyannish, right? But if we can instead focus on, hey, what is going well? How can we feed that? How can we nourish that? How can we do more of that? If you've got someone who has a growth, as we all do, we've got a growth area here. What are they doing well? How can I double down on that strength of theirs and really amplify that? Sometimes those things that are problems just become they're no longer relevant. Peter Drucker has a great phrase, a quote that he says that the central task of leadership is to, and I'm paraphrasing here, is to manage strengths such that the weaknesses become irrelevant.
Exactly. They're just a non-entity.
Yeah,
They really don't matter. And I love that because one of the things I say a lot is when we create out of fear, we create more fear. Right? When we
right.
create out of power and possibility, we create more of that. So I'll give you an example. As a marketer, my background's in marketing communications, like I love words. I always, our thought shape our words, our words shape our reality.
Hmm.
We jive on that, right?
Yep.
And people say, if I had a brochure, I'd feel better. If we had a better website, we'd feel better. And they wanted that website or that thing to because I'm afraid I'm okay, so what is that going to do for you? Well, I'm afraid I'll mess it up, right? Or afraid I won't say the right thing. So we're creating out of fear, right? And because we feel like we need this tool. Okay, let's then we're going to pause that and attach ourselves to our power, our worth, our value, the gifts we have to give both individually and collectively to the world. And then from that place, let's create a brochure because that's going to be a very, very different piece, right?
Indeed.
And that's what I love. And that leads me to the third thing I want to talk about, which is co-creation, because
Hmm.
that is how I operate my business. I don't do
Hmm.
stuff for people. I'll do it with you. I'll show you how to do it or I'll do it with you. But the power of co-creation is such an incredible one. And I would love for you to just talk a little bit about, I think, I think cerebrally people understand, of course, co-creation, but
Hmm.
what does that look like? And maybe give some examples of how, or maybe some organizations that you know or you've worked with have
Hmm.
use the power of co-creation to get better outcomes.
Yeah, well, let me just give you a little bit of the research that everyone can probably relate to here. I assume most listeners are probably aware of IKEA furniture, and there's actually a study out there that looked at what's coined the IKEA effect, where they found that people who built a, a relatively inexpensive piece of furniture together, valued that piece of furniture more highly than a premium piece of furniture that's arguably of higher quality because they put their sweat equity into it, right? And so intuitively that makes sense. I mean, again, I've put my sweat equity, I've had ownership in that, I've hopefully enjoyed the process and the experience, and the same can be applied to organizations. And so, to your question in terms of, one example, for instance, going back to like a strategic plan is a common use case that we have. And we do a lot of strategic planning work with our clients. And if a client were ever to come to me and say, hey, can you help us put together the plan, this and that? And if it's done in an ivory tower, we'll advise them that we're not the right fit, right? We'll certainly help. And there's got to be executive guardrails and discernment and so forth. But to the extent that they can have input from whether it's focus groups or surveys, or we often will do an intervention called summits where we'll bring, the team, the board, for example, in to meet with the staff members, right? And members of the broader community who support that organization, volunteers and so forth. The more you can get broader representation in the room where we do some dreaming together and visioning together and then designing prototypes and prioritizing initiatives and so forth, breaking down those silos. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with organizations where they said, this is the first time a board member has actually interacted with a staff member beyond the executive leadership team,
Wow.
right? Or vice versa, right? So there's often an us or them mentality. And you can imagine when you can create some egalitarian sort of, equalizing opportunity to have these conversations, there's some really rich conversations and perspectives that happen. And the beauty is when you go through it in the context of a strategic plan, people now have, they've heard different perspectives, and it's not this abstract thing now. They've actually talked to real live people that they've gotten to build some relationship with over this couple day time period. They understand the value of that perspective and so forth. The richness of the ideas that come out are much stronger. And so fundamentally, what they produce now as a strategic planning artifact is much stronger and more robust than anything that anyone else would come up with, individually and on their own.
Right. I want to go, all of that, yes. And I love the idea of a summit. I have something I call a discovery sessions, which sounds like a summit, but on a smaller scale.
Mhm.
And I've seen very, very powerful things happen in that as well, and where you're getting, all different kinds of people in the room, but they're all passionate about the one thing. And again, going back to how we sort of started this is it makes the how so secondary. Like,
Absolutely.
like instead of like, oh, we have to do it my way, we have to do it my like, we're gonna do whatever way works best because this is what we want.
Mhm.
Um, and also I want to go back to your IKEA analogy because there's often a lot of drama when people put together that IKEA
There
furniture,
is.
right?
There is.
And there's
Right.
dispute and there's conflict. And I think we want to create an isolation because we are afraid we don't know how to navigate differing view. Like it seems overwhelming to put all these people in a room and navigate all of those feelings and all of those viewpoints. And so, oh, let's just like, I'll just like, my husband and I, well, I'll just do it myself, blah, blah, blah,
Yep.
because I don't want
Yep.
to have to negotiate with him to get something done. Um, Actually, my son and I work really well together. And my husband came over like, get out, we've got this, because we have a rhythm, but there was conflict at first. So
Yep.
that conflict is a part of the process. And
Yep.
I'm hoping that's something that that you touch on as well, because I
Absolutely.
think especially in nonprofit, we're very conflict averse.
Yeah, I always say we want to make sure it's constructive conflict, right? It should be respectful, to respect the person and their perspective and so forth. But the absence of conflict is not peace; it's apathy,
Yeah.
right? And so you want to encourage alternate perspectives. You want to, and that comes, again, if you're in the new leader context, right? How can you invite alternate perspectives and voice? And that's really helpful. And, especially if you're in an early stage of brainstorming, one of the other things we talk about in our framework is there's a time for divergent thinking, really the brainstorming and open up to the various possibilities before we converge collectively on what's the best next thing for us given this context. And too often we try to jump to that convergent piece right there again to avoid the conflict. I'm just going to make this decision. We're just going to do it. Come
Yes.
hell or high water. This is the way it's going to be. And then usually you're spending time more cleaning it up on the back end with all the political fallout that comes from that kind of action.
All right. Yeah. So if we create more in a vacuum, usually the fallout comes after, right?
Right.
Because people
Pay
get
for it now or
mad,
pay for it later. Right.
right? They get mad because they weren't included, and then there's all that cleanup, and then the drama. I was the drama that that is on the front end in the creation. And I think one of the things when I do discovery sessions or when you do brainstorms, or anybody listening, a brainstorm is not a directive because somebody gives an idea. Like I think some people like, oh, they said this, I got to do that. No, you don't. And that's the sovereignty and the discernment of like, okay. I think that's when real leadership emerges. I can hear all of these viewpoints, and then, like within a smaller group or whatever that decision make, like we're going to take all of this in, and then from that create a path forward, rather than feeling like in these, in the co-creation that you have to have everybody's do it, every suggestion, has to be implemented or something
Right.
like that. It's
Right.
an idea, it's not a directive. And most people aren't that bought in. And that's what I felt like. That it's just they came up with something and if in being listened to and heard, you can say, here's where we got all the inspiration. Like, here's what we took and here's what we used. And then they kind of forget about what you didn't take and what you
Right.
didn't use
Right.
because they see themselves a part of what they said reflected. Um, and you're right. That's why I create the system that I have because that's how you get buy-in.
Right. Right. And as an executive director or other leader on the team, to the extent that you can model being open to those other perspectives, Again, you don't have all the answers. You're inviting that. I think one thing that you said that I want to is just a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's really powerful when you are ideating, especially if you're in a leadership role. Preface that, right? So it might this you want to say, hey, this is just a brainstorm. I want to think out loud. This might not be something we want to execute on, right? Because if you're in that executive director role, for example, sometimes your brainstorm might be confused by your team as, oh, this is a mandate now that I'm receiving, right? So it's
Right.
important to again
Let's sit
model that
around and think of
behavior.
stuff for the staff to do,
Exactly. So,
right?
I think that's it's a very micro thing, but it's a very powerful thing to just be mindful of when you're in that role. It's a way for you to model again how it's okay to model. It's okay to not have the right all the ideas. This is how we want to work together. But make sure to be a little bit more explicit and intentional about that when you're in that role, because otherwise folks might spin out of a meeting like, oh my gosh, they said we got to do X, and that really
Right.
wasn't necessarily the intent.
Right, yeah, yeah. Or they're going to shoot down ideas because they're already feeling like the panic,
Yep,
rise within them. And
that's
yeah,
exactly right.
that's what I call that a pre-frame, like when you're setting the expectation of like, hey, here's what we want to accomplish in this session. This is just about listening. We're not making
Mhm.
any decisions. There's no, um, and walking people through that. And then just like, because in a framework like this, and here's what comes next, and then you can explain to them like what you're going to do with all this
Right.
input and then what comes next. All right, you mentioned some clients you have. I'm interested to like, do you work with individuals? Do you work with organizations? How do you work with your clients?
So in a couple capacities, we do a lot of executive advisory or executive coaching. So it might be a one-on-one executive leader role. And then simultaneously, either in tandem with that or separately from that, we do a lot of organizational transformation work. So a common use case might be coaching the executive on how to optimize their leadership personally and professionally, and then working with their leadership team at a team level. It might be doing a summit at the organization level, and so forth, to help them be successful ultimately in their role and help them, go through that successful, change initiative or whatever that mandate is that they're tasked with. So it's anything along that continuum is where we play.
Um, One of the things I think is really important when we talk about the coaching space is like I want to raise your capacity. Like I don't, and it makes probably our business, I don't want to say harder, but I don't like that word. I'm just going to say it creates some challenges because I ultimately want to increase your capacity, right?
Mhm.
I'd rather help you learn how to be a coach so that right, so you can guide other people
Mhm.
rather than like leading us. And I find that, and I'm just asking for your input on this because I find that that is also one of the things that I see is like kind of creating sort of codependent relationships with people that now you need them. This is different than like my old company that does like graphic design and services. I'm not talking about like a vendor services. I'm talking about like consultants. Like ideally we're here to build people's capacity so they don't need us anymore
Well,
eventually.
it may be
Unless they
contextual,
want
right?
to, right?
I always say it may be contextual to that particular need, or they may continue to evolve and grow. The reality is, one of my favorite things. I've been working with some of my clients for upwards of 3 or 4 years right now, and one of my favorite phrases say, one of my early coaches says, "Congratulations, you've upgraded the quality of your problems." Right? In some case, and the reality is there's always going to be challenges, right? But if you
Right.
can get to a point where I'm not worrying about where I'm going to, if I'm going to be solvent next year versus, hey, we have all these things we'd like to do now and we've got some funding, right? How do we prioritize that? That's an upgraded problem, right? And you may still, benefit from help in that context to have a thought partner to think through, right? Because sometimes just having that objective lens, for example, can be helpful. So, I have a growth mindset, right? And so there's always going to be opportunity within an organization to continue to coach them.
There's
But to your
always
point,
room for
we
growth.
don't want codependency for sure.
Yeah. I had a therapist who called it OSI, opportunity to strengthen intention.
Okay.
But yeah, you read like so, and hey, I solved this one, and then oh look what, and or like she calls it coming up for clearing. What's coming up for clearing now, right? Because there's
Right.
always going to be a new thing, right? And it is probably an upgrade. Oh, like, okay, so I had a client and she, the biggest issue was I don't have time to fundraise because I have all this admin stuff. And they got her an admin. She's like, oh crap, now I have to go raise all this
Yep.
money.
Right.
And that was
Yep.
then the third thing was because she'd been working with me for a while, she was having so much fun raising money. She felt bad. The people who had to sit in the office all day and didn't get to like go visit with people and raise money. And like that brought like, hey, that is definitely an upgrade in the quality of her problems.
Right. Right.
Every time was, just like navigating the joy that she felt it was a new experience to her. And I love that. That is amazing. Okay. So if people want to get to know you a little bit better or interested in getting some coaching from you, what is the best way to reach out?
So one of two places I can go to my LinkedIn, which is Patrick, and the last name is spelled Farran. Feel free to send me a connection request. Let me know that you heard through here so I don't treat it as spam. I'm very happy to connect with you through LinkedIn or our company site at lucemgroup.com, which is ADLUCEMGROUP. There's plenty of free resources on there. We'll have more information on our book coming out
Yeah, I
soon.
was gonna say that we'll put the links in the show notes, but
That'd
that's
be
where we
great.
can find the info on your
Perfect.
books.
Perfect. I'm happy to do I do a free intake call. So if anyone wants to talk strategy, either personally or professionally with their organization, those links are on my LinkedIn page and our website. So happy to have those
And it's all the
conversations.
same. It's all the same. How you show up
Absolutely.
one place is how you show up
Yep.
every place.
Exactly.
I do
Exactly.
not believe there's personal and professional. It's all you. All right. Now, here my always my last question, Patrick, because we are not that far from each other. You are a visitor to St. Louis. If we ever wind up in a karaoke bar, if you come to St. Louis, that is high probability. What is your go-to song? What am I going to
So
hear?
as long as you don't put me on the spot to sing it now,
I will not, I promise.
one that I often do is Billie Jean's, Billy Michael Jackson's
Michael
Billie
Jackson's
Jean,
Billie
right?
Jean.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
have to do, I have a very Kevin James style dance that I do to it, right? So you can, but I will do that in a couple of
Okay,
contexts,
so
and we'll
there's
leave
there's
that to your
choreography as
imagination.
well. That's what I'm hearing.
You'll have to compensate for the bad vocals, right? So
Yes, right,
yeah,
right. No one will know because you're putting on a show.
that's exactly right. So
I find so much joy in karaoke. It's like the whole full body expression. I could go on, but I won't.
yeah.
But all right, thank you so much. Is there any last words you'd like to impart on the wonderful nonprofit folks who are listening today?
I just, you're doing a very important work, and I know we're in a particularly turbulent time. So, if there's anything I can ever help you with, feel free to reach out and use me as a resource. But, I wish you Godspeed, and I'm here for you if I can ever be of help.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. Oh, thank you very much, Patrick, for
It's my
sharing all
pleasure.
that
Thanks for
wisdom.
having me.
I'm inspired listening to you, and I learned a lot today. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And that is it for this episode of the Influential Nonprofit. Just like that, the time just flies. And again, if you want to please reach out to Patrick, all is in the show notes. And as you can always reach out to me as well. My link is in the show notes, and we are both happy to help you just be the best leader you can be and make the most change possible. And we'll see you next time on the Influential Nonprofit.
Thank you.